What's the most important question in crypto? Is it when to buy, as in buy today or buy in a few months from now or in a few years from now? Maybe not necessarily, because usually prices tend to be low for a relatively long period of time, right? That's why there is the accumulation zone, the accumulation time. People can buy for a year or two before a bull run starts. So when to buy is probably not the most important question. What to buy, as in what altcoin to pick, is probably also not that important, because there is a lot of correlation within crypto, right? When Bitcoin goes up, then Ethereum goes up, then a lot of altcoins go up as well. And yes, there are some altcoins that outperform others, but especially if you diversify across crypto and you don't just have one or two altcoins, but you have 5 or 10 altcoins, then the average performance of your portfolio will somewhat resemble the market. So what to buy is probably also not that important. Now, where to buy or how to buy is probably also not that important, right? If you buy via a centralized exchange or a decentralized exchange or via over-the-counter, yes, it does have an impact on the fees, and yes, it has some impact on security, and yes, you can make this completely wrong, as in if you've got all your assets in one centralized exchange that then goes bust, as in with the FTX case, you do have a problem. But in general, right, if you look at this in the grand scheme of things, how you're buying, where you're buying is probably also not that important of a question. I believe the most important question of all of the questions in crypto is actually when to sell. Because selling right is much, much harder than buying right. And having a good approach of when to sell is very, very hard. Because just going by gut feel is very unlikely going to cut it. The majority of people will not make money in crypto. Returns are very much concentrated in just a few hands. That in turn means that the approaches of when to sell have to be better than of the vast majority of other people. Because let's compare this with buying. Let's think about an average Bitcoin chart or an average altcoin chart. What we usually see is that the price tends to be at low levels for quite a prolonged period of time. And then when a bull run happens, it happens over several months usually. And then at some point we see a price peak. And after the price peak, we usually see the price declining much faster than it initially appreciated. In other words, we tend to be at elevated prices at much shorter periods of time than at lower prices. So we can just take a random price out of the whole price history of, say, Bitcoin, and just pick this random point in time, you're very likely going to get an average low price, not a high price. So if you don't time the market well, it's not necessarily a big deal if you don't pick the perfect bottom, because there will be a lot of other bottoms. But if you don't time it well when selling, you might have to wait for the next cycle, for the next maybe 4 years, until you can get similar kinds of sell prices again. So selling right is much, much harder than buying right. Another issue with selling is that the stakes tend to be much, much higher. It's much easier in crypto to be over-allocated and having too much exposure than to be under-allocated. Because let's say you're dollar cost averaging into your favorite cryptocurrency or into Bitcoin, right? You're buying in a bit every month, and maybe you've also got some stocks, maybe some gold, maybe some property, whatever it is, right? You've got a portfolio of all kinds of things, and you also have Bitcoin in the mix, and you're buying in regularly. It's relatively easy to keep the proper risk allocation as long as prices are relatively low, right? When it crashes, when it goes further down, you're simply buying more, and you keep your risk tolerance, you keep your allocation at, 5 to 10% of all of your wealth, if you're conservative.
Here's the problem with crypto YouTube. People promoting becoming degen or buying 100x coins. That's what gives clicks, but that's not what's going to bring you forward. I refuse to take money from centralized exchanges. I refuse to take money from crypto projects. I refuse to pump and dump a coin and filling up my pockets in the background. I don't do any of this. Instead, I share my knowledge in the form of tutorials in the premium membership. So that's content that won't do well on YouTube, but that builds up skill over time. You can also directly contact me over there. You can directly pick my brain. Feel free to check it out. thebitcoinstrategy.com is the link.
Now what happens once you see the rally? Let's say you continue to dollar cost average in, and after a while you've got, say, 10% of your portfolio in Bitcoin, and now we see Bitcoin suddenly taking off, right? Now we suddenly see Bitcoin going from 15K all the way to 70K, right? After that 4 to 5x in return, you don't have anymore 10% of your portfolio in crypto, but suddenly 40%. Now the stakes are much higher, and that's the problem. As in, if you don't time the sell right, you're suddenly losing a lot relative in your wealth. If you don't time the buys right, it doesn't really matter that much because you have this under control, 5 to 10%. But if you don't time the sale correctly, you've got a problem. Now it matters, right? Now suddenly your overall wealth might drop by 10 or 20% just because you're naturally over allocated to Bitcoin or to crypto as a whole after a bull run. So selling the top again is much harder because we are at these high prices for a much shorter period of time. And it also matters much more in terms of overall wealth because we tend to be highly exposed after a crypto bull run. Now, the third reason why thinking about the question of when to sell is so important is because the psychology is completely against us at the point of sale. When we are buying into the market, right? Then usually what's happening is that nobody is really looking at the market, as in there's simply just apathy. There's very little attention. There's very little crypto content. Most people don't expose themselves to crypto, YouTube, etc. And so nobody wants to know about Bitcoin or about crypto because most people are in losses, right? So when we are low in prices, it's simply apathy. So if you're buying, you will not hear a lot of people arguing against you. Most people simply just don't want to know about crypto as a whole, right? They're not really interested in it anymore. And so you simply just continue to buy and you don't get any backlash, and that's psychologically relatively easy. However, when you're selling, there is a lot of attention on crypto. If you tell somebody that you're selling when prices are high, most people will argue against you. Again, because there's a lot of eyes on crypto and most people want to see crypto prices continue to rise, right? So there's simply way more interaction at that point in time. A lot of people that are around you at the time, they want to see continued rising prices. They don't want to see the price go down. And so when you tell them that you're selling, you're truly contrarian, right? You're truly pushing against the masses. That's not true for buying, right? The masses are simply away from crypto. But when you are selling, the masses are in crypto and they are very loud when you're not agreeing with them. And so those are the main reasons, right? It's very hard to time it right. The stakes are super, super high and the masses will argue against your decision to sell at elevated prices. So thinking about selling, I believe, is the most important question. Most people get it wrong, and that's why we have to think about it much more than most people. Now, I personally have a lot of different approaches to time potential tops, to find ways to sell the market, to rebalance portfolios, to see when the market might potentially be overheated. But I don't want to reiterate this again in this video. I simply just want to state in this video how important thinking about selling is. If you are simply just relying on gut feel, and you think that it will magically appear to you when to sell, then probably you are not going to sell on time. I simply just want to convey in this video that you might need to think about this more. But maybe you've already got a good approach, right? If you've got some data points that you're following, if you've got something that worked well in the past, at least when looking back, right? Maybe you didn't sell, in fact, in the past at the top, but maybe if you would have followed this particular indicator or this particular data point, then it would have been a nice time to sell. If you've got some interesting approaches to find good exit opportunities in crypto, then feel free to comment this down below, because I'm always looking actively for selling opportunities. It's not that hard to find buying opportunities, but it's very hard to find good selling opportunities. So if you've got interesting data, interesting approaches, feel free to let me know down below. And maybe I will make a dedicated video on just that particular indicator so that we can all learn from this. Buying is easy, selling is hard. Thinking about selling is super important. Having a fixed system of when to sell is maybe even better. I believe because of high correlation across crypto, the majority of time should not be spent trying to find the correct cryptocurrency. I believe simply because of its importance, it's better to use the majority of time to think about when to sell, to find ways to exit the market or to at least reduce exposure to the market, to actually lock in some profit that most people aren't doing. If you got something out of this video, feel free to give this a like. It helps the channel grow. Feel free to also join our Telegram group. There's a link to Telegram down below. It's 100% free. Looking very much forward to chatting with you over there. Cheers.